It is called the Monkey Trial. William Jennings Bryan for the prosecution. Clarence Darrow for the defense. Begins in Dayton, Tennessee, a story of men in crisis.
In June of 1925, Dayton, Tennessee, nestled in the foothills of the Cumberlands, was a sleepy, obscure little town of 5,000. But by mid-July, it was a gaudy midway of lemonade stands, souvenir hawkers, telegraph sending stations, and had swollen to 3 times its normal size. It all revolved about a new state law, which outlawed the teaching of evolution.
Be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Tennessee that it shall be unlawful to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals.
Scopes himself was quite secondary to the trial. A rather personable young schoolteacher, he purposely created the issue by lecturing to his class on evolution. The stage was set. Scopes was arrested, indicted, and brought to trial. Then to Dayton came the 2 real protagonists. To prosecute, elder statesman, 3-time presidential candidate, William Jennings Bryan.
I am here to protect the Word of God from the greatest atheist and agnostic in the United States.
For the defense, the highly successful criminal lawyer, Clarence Darrow.
If today you can take a thing like evolution and make it a crime to teach in the public schools, then at the next session you may ban books and newspapers. Soon you may set Catholic against Protestant, and then Protestant against Protestant.
Bryan believed it was strictly a battle between religion and atheism. Darrow insisted it was a fight between a literal translation of the Bible and a common sense one. There were many supporters from all faiths on both sides. The climax occurred when the defense called Bryan himself to be a witness.
Now, Mr. Bryan, let me ask you if you take the Bible literally. For example, do you really believe that Jonah was swallowed by a whale?
Yes, I believe that. But it was a fish, not a whale.
Was this a mine run of fish or made specially for the purpose?
I am not prepared to say.
Well, do you think that the Lord purposefully made a fish big enough to swallow Jonah?
I do. Well, one miracle is just as easy to believe as another. A God who can make a whale can make a man and make both do what he pleases.
The tiny courtroom, bursting with the press and spectators, sweltered in the impartial heat. And finally the judge moved the trial out on the shaded lawn, where Bryan and Darrow, in shirt sleeves and galluses, continued their duel.
Mr. Bryan, do you believe literally the story of Eve?
I do.
And the story of the temptation of Eve by the serpent?
Yes.
And that God made the serpent crawl on his belly for eternity because of his participation in the temptation?
That is my belief.
And how, sir, do you suppose that the snake got along before that?
What is it, Judge?
Scopes was found guilty and fined $100, which the Baltimore Sun paid. It was a humiliating final hour for the great commoner. In less than a week, he died.
In New York, Atlanta, Chicago, and San Francisco, urban America is on the move. Socialism spreads, unionism thrives, change hammers at the structure of American society. The ideas of Thomas Edison have revolutionized technology. Sigmund Freud reviews the disturbing conflicts of the ego and the id. And even now, Albert Einstein carries in his mind the seeds of the atomic age. Cubism, psychoanalysis, socialism, strident challenges to a new generation of man.
Where were you on May 20th, 1927? If you lived in New York, you may well have been at the Sharkey Maloney fight, where Joe Humphreys asked the crowd for 1 minute of silence for the youngster they called Slim. No matter where you were, you will probably remember for the rest of your life what you did and what you heard, and how the newspapers looked as the Spirit of St. Louis inched its way across the great circle route toward Paris.
This is CHNS, Halifax, Nova Scotia. The government wireless station at Cape Rave, Newfoundland, reported that Lindbergh passed overhead at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The weather is reported as poor.
This is WJZ, New York. George Hicks reporting. As Saturday dawned over the vast Atlantic, the Lindbergh plane is unreported since passing Newfoundland early last night.
This is Station 2RN Dublin calling. The American flyer Lindbergh passed over Dingle Bay on the Irish coast at a low altitude at 1:30 this afternoon.
Ici Radio Paris. Un bateau pêcheur près de Cherbourg vient de nous informer que l'aéroplane de Lindbergh est arrivé à la côte de France à 3 heures de distance de Paris.
This is Lowell Thomas in New York. He made it. Charles A. Lindbergh, Lucky Lindy as they call him, landed at Le Bourget Airport, Paris at 5:24 this afternoon, thus becoming the first person to fly New York to Paris non-stop.
At Le Bourget, crowds lifted the slender, shy Midwesterner on their shoulders. Americans heard the news and went wild. It was Armistice Day, New Year's Eve, and a World Series no-hitter all rolled into one combustible hour. In New York Harbor, every ship loaned its whistle to the celebration. In Boston, Des Moines, and San Francisco, fire engines joined the mass hysteria. In an era of cynicism, the world had a hero. The president sent a cruiser to bring him back, and most citizens thought it should have been a battleship. They made him a colonel, and just about every city in North and South America offered him their cities and their hearts. Since that fateful morning of January 16, 1920, when the consumption of alcoholic beverages had become illegal, a new kind of institution had sprung up in the land.
Hello, suckers!
The speakeasy became an American habit and a billion-dollar industry. Because it was illegal to drink in public or anywhere, the citizenry of all ages entrenched themselves almost nightly in dark, dingy cellars, where against a background of bad murals, pockmarked bouncers, and stale air, they forced the human body to swallow some of the most corrosive poison ever consumed by man or woman.
You see that fellow over there? That's Al Capone.
Al Capone was a bull-necked, ruthless, loathsome, syphilitic man who became more powerful than the mayor of Chicago. By controlling the sources of Chicago's alcohol, Capone built an organization of racketeers which controlled the nightclubs and speakeasies where it was drunk. Everybody talked about Scarface Al. The working press wrote some courageous pieces about him, and the Dutch Schultzes and the others, but nobody knew what to do about them. And besides, these were the roaring 20s, and it was more important to know what Consolidated Can closed at, and would Shipwreck Kelly break the flagpole-sitting record. But the big question of 1927 was whether Silent Cal would take another whack at the presidency.
I do not choose to run for president in 1928. Sanders, please have 25 copies of that made for the press.
There are those in the Republican Party who will tell you that Coolidge wanted the 1928 nomination and launched his trial balloon to precipitate a draft. If such was the case, the stampede to Hoover must have broken his heart. Hoover made his race on the prosperity ticket, 2 chickens in every pot.
Given a chance to go forward with the policies of the last 8 years, we shall soon, with the help of God, be in sight of the day when poverty will be banished from this nation.
American can 181 7/8, AT&T 335 5/8, copper 162, New York Central.
It was 1929, the year of the
505.
golden glow, of the boom, of the bull market, when a nation with a rainbow round its cocky shoulder stumbled onto what appeared to be the permanent plateau of prosperity. The capital was still in Washington, but the nation's pulse was to be felt where two swollen arteries named Broad and Wall Streets met. There, the stock market reflected a nation's fever. Everyone played the market. The financial page was read by more people than the sports page. Your barber and your cab driver talked about the kill their cousin had made in copper. And everybody talked about margin. At 10 o'clock on the morning of October 24th, the traditional bell sounded across the exchange, and another day of trading got underway.
General Electric, 315. General Electric, 310.
But by 11 o'clock, it was apparent that this was no ordinary day. This was to be Black Thursday, and for a number of well-known stocks, no buyers could be found at any price. A constricting ripple of fear spread over the startled floor and to every corner of the nation.
Margin. You'll have to put up more margin.
Few of the millions of people who were playing the market owned their stocks outright. Most of it was on margin. And to do this, more than $6 billion had been borrowed from banks and brokers who would be forced to call if panic seized the market.
Margin. Must have more margin.
Still, there were no takers as values continued to fall. But on the following Tuesday, October 29th, the bottom fell out of the market. The big bull market was dead. The golden glow of prosperity had turned to dross. But the disease was by no means localized. The toxic germs of despair were pumped to every part of the body. The arteries of commerce were clogged with 5,000 bank failures. 45,000 miles of railroads fell into bankruptcy. Big business that didn't fail retrenched and contracted, and the disease raced on to the capillaries and the cells. 12 million unemployed. More than 500,000 farms lost as farm prices fell 75%. 1930 brought the droughts to the eroded plains. 1931 brought the bread lines and the soup kitchens and the apple sellers and more unemployment. 15 million now. In 1932, federal troops were forced to fire on the bonus marchers who had encamped in Washington. Defiant farmers stood in line with shotguns to fight off tax foreclosures. The citizens of the richest nation in the world watched its lifeblood turning to water, unable to digest the produce of its burgeoning storehouse. This, indeed, was total depression.
This is Robert Trout at our election headquarters in the newsroom in New York. The results of the 1932 election now appear to be certain. The ticket of Roosevelt and Garner has won a clear-cut majority over the Republican ticket of Hoover and Curtis. And so the United States has a new president. He will not take office, of course, until next March the 4th, when on the steps of the Capitol, Chief Justice Hughes will administer the oath to Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
President Hoover, Mr. Chief Justice, my friends, this is a day of national consecration, and I am certain that on this day my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.